Blackhawks Breakaway podcast for CHSN. We're brought to you by Toyota. Toyota has more all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive vehicles than any other brand. Find yours and shine on. Toyota, let's go places. With Charlie Roumeliotis, I am Pat Boyle. How you doing today, Charlie?
Another 3-game losing streak for the Blackhawks that we have to talk about.
Yeah, and it's kind of been a similar movie the last month plus. They've now dropped 10 of 11, and most of them have been lopsided losses. The latest was a defeat at the hands of Calgary. 5-2 was the final on Monday night. The Flames swept the season series, outscoring the Blackhawks in the 3 games 14-7.
Where do we start?
Yeah, I feel like we've done this podcast before. What do you make of where this team is at right now?
Yeah, I mean, the Calgary game specifically, there was at no point did the Blackhawks ever feel in control of that hockey game from start to finish. Disappointing. I was talking about it in my pregame show that Calgary went into that game with the second fewest 5-on-5 goals in the NHL with only 66. And they had 3 5-on-5 goals in the first period. I mean, it was like, geez, I mean, this is not a high-powered offense.
They have one of the worst penalty kills in the league.
Yeah, worst penalty kills in the league.
And you only got the 1 5-minute major.
Yeah, and so, man, it's been so frustrating lately. I think for me, it's been 4 games now where the Blackhawks have gotten, or is it 5 games where they've gotten 4 power plays? Like they just have not gotten any power play opportunities, and they don't have the puck either. So that's primarily why they're not getting any power plays. And in the previous 3 games, the Hawks had 4 power plays in each of those games, and they scored 4 power play goals in those 3 games. And so when you're not getting any power plays, not only are you missing opportunities to score a goal, but you're missing opportunities to generate some sort of momentum off those power plays. And so I thought the Edmonton game, I'm like, okay, going into this game, probably going to be a disaster. And it ended up being Hawks hold 2 2-goal leads. And on some level, you kind of expected Edmonton to have that push because they're just so much better than the Blackhawks. On the other hand, you're like, man, it was another game where the Hawks held 2 2-goal leads and they didn't have anything to show for it, not just a win, but a point. And so that's just been frustrating. And it's wearing on the guys. Like I was listening, watching the post-game show yesterday, and I mean, they're running out of answer. They've probably already run out of answers, but now it's like you can see it on their face. And, we mentioned Jason Dickinson in the last podcast about the practice. I mean, I don't know how much worse it can get before guys are just like, I don't know where we go from here.
Yeah, we're going to hear from Nick Foligno coming up in just a second, and it's you can tell it's wearing on him. You know, I honestly don't know where to begin sometimes when I'm talking about this team. The fact that they have a better win percentage against top 10 teams than they do the rest of the league is another baffling head scratcher. I think it's probably 2 things. I think they're more locked in and focused for a top 10 team because they feel any miscue or lack of focus, they'll get embarrassed. And so they're laser focused sharp on a particular night when they take on a top 10 team. But I also think maybe these top 10 teams, like they look at the schedule and say, well, this is the one game where we're going to bring our B or C game out of the gates and see where that takes us and then try to turn it on late. But I am really thoroughly upset about how they take on these teams that are hanging around the wild card picture. Those are the hungrier teams right now. When we get to January, the teams like Detroit and like Calgary are fighting to, be in the playoff mix. And you're going to get just as embarrassed by them, if not more, because they're coming out with a sense of urgency. And I just I don't know. I feel like we've done this podcast before. I feel like we've pretty much exhausted most angles, and man, rebuilds are tough, Charlie. That's the bottom line.
I think the frustrating part lately, like over the last month or so, has been the losses have been like 3+ goal, 4+ goal losses. And you're like, where did that come from? Or like, where earlier in the year, we had that running stat where it was like 35 games, the first 35 games this season, all but one of them, Hawks were leading, tied, trailing within one of every third period. And now it's like the last month or so, it's been a lot of these losses have been the game's over by the second period. And it's like, man, this is what we saw a lot last year. And I think the more not alarming thing, but is like they already made the coaching change. So you would think that there would be some sort of honeymoon phase that you kind of get you string together some wins or some momentum. But now it feels like it's going the other way. And I think primarily like a huge reason for that is we've nailed it on this podcast a bunch, but the goaltending percentage. I mean, the save percentage under Luke Richardson, Hawks were 11th. Under Sorensen, I think they're dead last in the NHL. And so, I mean, the goaltending has not been great, but there have been so many. The effort level has been pretty concerning to me lately. Against the higher tier teams, great, but against these bottom feeders and middle of the pack teams, it's just I don't know why it's not there.
So let me ask you this. Okay, the goaltending has not been as good under Sorensen, no question about it. But to the point of being in all those games, all but one in the first 35, and by that, up a goal in the third, tied, or down a goal, to now all these lopsided losses, do you think it's a systemic issue or an effort issue? We're putting goalie in its own category. The goalie, has not been up to par. But
Right.
But is it a system situation or is it effort?
Yeah, I think maybe a little bit of both. Because I know some of the guys will talk about how, we're all working hard, all effort is there, but it's like Ryan Donato was saying after one of the recent games, I think it was the Detroit game, he was like, we have to elevate our effort level even more than we think we already are playing. And so that's one case. And then second case, I wonder how much is there still adapting to the system? Like when you take over for Sorensen, like he's not going to come in on day one and say, these are all the changes that we're going to make. So I'm wondering if over the last month or so, they've been making these tweaks along the way. And I don't know, are the guys having a hard time grasping it? It's not really rocket science. Like they've played a lot of these systems before. I know they did make sort of a tweak to, they had like the 2-1-2 on the forecheck, but when they're kind of set up in the neutral zone, I think they've tweaked that a little bit to make sure that they're not giving up some odd man rushes. And so I'm not sure. To me, I think you see the coaching changes, like you saw the coaching change in Detroit. Todd McClellan comes in and it's like they get that new coach bump, 7-game winning streak. And the Hawks had that a little bit at the beginning. They won 3 in a row. Feels like a 7-game winning streak in Chicago.
Yeah.
But that it was very short-lived. And now it's like, well, now what? And so, yeah, you mentioned it. Like rebuilds are hard. It was still the right move for the Blackhawks to obviously full scale this, but I just think a lot of the players that are going to play big time roles on the next great Chicago team, it's like you want them to be here now. Like I feel like I'm tweeting out a clip of like Sasha Boisvert, what he's having an unreal season for North Dakota as a freshman, and you're like, but he's still a freshman in college, And so it's hard because you can see some light at the end of the tunnel as far as in the pipeline. But I think short term, we're like, how do we get through the next couple years to just bridge that gap to those players?
Yeah, no, it's I'm with you. I was just looking at some prospects too, and they're all performing at a very high productive rate at their various spot, whether it be university, whether it be U.S. Hockey League, wherever they may be. There's a lot of bright spots, but like you said, they're still 2 to 3 years away from even touching NHL ice. Let's hear from Nick Foligno after that 5-2 loss to Calgary.
I'm not going to, I'm not going to go down the whole soliloquy of what we need to do wrong here or what we've been doing wrong here. It's just, you got to look within. I mean, this is how you get out of it. You got to either want to be here and do it or you don't. And that's kind of where we're at right now.
Why do the guys seem disconnected, particularly with their passes today?
I mean, that's the $1 million question. I think there's such a want in here of doing the right thing, but not understanding what that entails. And sometimes the disconnect can be from being on two different pages because you're looking for a play that's maybe not there and the simple one's there and the guy's expecting you to make that, you're not. So it's the idea of being predictable, and we're just not enough, and that's on us as players. I mean, it's just a simple part of the game.
So Seth has had a tough stretch and another tough night. Have you talked to him or any advice or anything?
I think it's just, he's a big part of what we're trying to do here. So obviously there's all of us that can play better, Seth included, and that's something that I think everyone takes personal. He's a proud guy. He's a guy that wants to make a difference, and sometimes we also, the guys who have played a long time, need to realize there's a way of simplifying, and we've all gone through it, and he's going to find his way out of it. But we obviously need everyone to play better, and that's just the reality of the situation we're in. The big guys have to be big guys in big moments, and the other teams are doing it, so we need to find a way to do it with our guys.
I know you referenced a few times this season, I've heard you kind of the unwillingness to do the dirty work that it takes to clear out the front of the net, get in front of the net, and it seems like a lot of nights is just not getting any better.
Yeah, you nailed it. I think it's just a want, right? That's what I'm saying. Listen, guys, it's not easy being in the basement. It's where it's where we are. We're at the bottom of the league, and the only way out is hard work and a grit and a grind and a mental attitude that you have to just be as tenacious as possible. Even if it's not in your DNA, you have to do it. And that's the only way you climb out of it. And maybe it's not for some guys, but for the guys here that are in this team, that are playing on this team, it's the only way you can do it. I understand you want Connor to score 4 goals a night. It's not going to happen right now, right? Like, it's not. And I hope it does, and it hopefully will down the road. But where we're at right now, it's a collective willingness to be as competitive as possible on each guy. And maybe it's out of character for some guys. Maybe it isn't something that they just do naturally, but it will benefit you later on. And that's where we have to get to, is everybody has to do it. Everybody, and it's not fighting, it's not running around hitting guys. It's like a willingness to go to the dirty areas, to go in front of the net, to knock somebody down in front of our net, to block a shot, to break up a play that maybe a guy screws up on. I commended Bedsy tonight, and Allen falls at the blue line, but he back checks and breaks up a 4-on-2. And I said, that matters, and he's doing it. So it's on every guy to have that kind of mindset. And until we understand that, you're going to keep hearing me say the same dumb and it's going to get old, and I'm going to get tired of saying it, and that's just the reality of where we're at.
It's easy for the way I'm you, but to hear, like the younger players, how it weighs on Connor and just that competitiveness.
How can it not? How can it not? I can't imagine being that age and you just go home. I have a family, so I can kind of get away from it, but he just eats and sleeps and breathes it, and this isn't the start of a career that I was hoping for him, So, I'm not trying to I don't want to get, there's only one way to get out of this, and that's just by coming together as a group. And, you guys will say what you want to say about our team, but we're not going to go down that road of getting on each other. That's just not going to work. It's not going to get us out. We have to come together. We have to come together as a team, and it might be painful to hear that, and it might take a few more weeks, but we're going to have to find a way through. And the guys that are committed to doing that, the guys that want to be here, are going to be here and make a difference. And that's just the reality of where we're at as a group right now, because it's not good enough.
Do you feel like it's a critical time for them, though? These are their formative years. They're building culture.
Absolutely.
So
yeah, you take it personal as a guy who's supposed to be here and lead, but also, it's not just on one person. It's on the whole team. There's a collective group here. That's the problem. It's not Connor Bedard. It's not Peter Mrazek. It's not Alex Vlasic. It's the entire Chicago Blackhawks, right? And I think we got to stop thinking about that as like, oh, he was good tonight. It matters that everyone was good tonight. If everyone plays their game, we win. That's just the reality. Look, we beat some really good teams by everyone. It's a mindset of coming in, probably not wanting to be embarrassed and finding a way to play the right way, and we win games. So it's in here. It's just a mindset of doing it over and over and over again. And that's professionalism, that's winning habits, and we just haven't nailed that down.
You know, we feel like we've done it before on this podcast. I know he feels like he has had that post-game scrum conversation several times, but you can hear in his voice, he's fed up. And, you know, he keeps asking for the players to look within themselves and find what they need to do to personally raise their game to the next level. What struck you as you listened to that on your post-game show last night?
Yeah, I know he said it after the Winter Classic loss where he was like, you know, at some point we're going to be tired of talking about it. Fans are going to be tired of hearing it, and you guys are going to be tired of asking it, you know, and it's like, yes, yes, and yes, you know? And so, he's saying all the right things, and, you know, as the captain, like he's voicing the right tones of what he is saying. But it's frustrating because it's not just like there's a month left in the season. Hawks are hitting a little bit of a lull. It's like we just started the second half, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's like, how do you psychologically, because it's not physically at this point, you know, it's not like it's so psychological. And to be clear, actually, let me back up. Is it still a bottom 5-8 roster in the NHL? Probably. Yes. So I don't think anyone is confusing this Blackhawks team with they should be knocking on the door of a playoff spot. I think it's in a lot of these games, they're finding ways to unravel late and not even just lose in just lose. They're losing in regulation. Like all of they've played in only 4 games this year where it's gone into overtime. 4 games. And think about how many close games there have been going down to the wire. And so I think that adds up too, where you're not even getting these extra points where you're losing in overtime. Maybe you're forcing it to a shootout or whatever, and you're losing there. That at least you're like, okay, we picked up 5 out of 7 points or whatever. And you're like, a couple of those are overtime losses, but we're making progression. The losses in regulation in a lot of these tight games, mostly in the beginning of the season, that's been probably difficult to swallow. And so, yeah, so you heard it from Nick Foligno. He was asked in the morning, after morning skate about like, hey, you're the captain of this team. How difficult has it been to try to maintain a positive culture in here while also understanding that you have to hold yourselves and the young guys and everyone in the entire locker room to a high standard? And it has been challenging. He was singling out Pat Maroon as a guy that still wants to get the guys together on the road and like making sure that it's still a fun place to come to the rink and to be with the boys. But unless you're not winning, it's very hard to come to the rink and find a positive attitude. And so that's the cure all, is to try to find ways to win hockey games and just string together some points.
In Foligno's comments last night, he said, I feel bad with the way Connor Bedard's NHL career has started. And look, I think, you know, he's been dealt a tough hand as far as entering the league with a next to last place roster, and with, you know, in the midst of a rebuild, you know, the thought is you aren't going out there adding free agents that are in their prime at top dollar because you're not ready to win as a team yet. So you get these, you know, elder skatesmen, guys that are in their mid 30s to 36, 37-ish. You get them on 1 and 2 year deals, and they come in, try to help your culture, try to help you win. But it's a bunch of 37-year-olds and, you know, 21-year-olds that are, it's not a recipe for success. All the more reason I give Connor Bedard credit for what he's been doing. I mean, he scored his 100th point in his 112th career game last night. That tied him with Roenick as the 7th fastest player to reach the 100-point mark in franchise history. The fewest games as a teenager to 100 points since Sidney Crosby. And then you put it in further perspective. So McDavid, yeah, he needed 92 games to get 100 points. Austin Matthews took the exact same amount of time, 112 games to get to 100. And Nathan McKinnon needed 143 games. Jack Hughes needed 160. So when you hear those numbers, and you've heard people send up the flares and sound the sirens about like, whoa, what's going on with Bedard? And you compare him to other top echelon players in this league, he is A-okay. He is fine. His numbers, to me, his numbers are even more impressive knowing how offensively challenged this team has been last year and this year.
Right. I mean, he's still having a great year, even though he only has 12 goals, and that's kind of where you think Bedard, big-time goal scorer, like he still considers himself more of a playmaker, right?
Yes.
And so he does have that arsenal where he's like, he can shoot the puck on an elite level, but he can also play make with the best of them. And, you know, I just think of the play last night where he has that unbelievable little smooth dish to Taylor Hall in the third period. I mean, it's a wide open net, you know, if he elevates the puck or whatever, and Dustin Wolf ends up saving it. It's like, that was a primary assist right there if that goes in, you know? And so it's like, even some of those plays that you look at that weren't converted, you're like, oh, he could have had another one there. I think the thing with Connor that makes it so difficult, not just, you know, we talk about opponents that come into Chicago and they're like, stop number 98, and you're probably going to win the hockey game. Not having a well-rounded roster right now is probably challenging for Connor too, specifically, because think about, let's just say 3-4 years from actually, let's think about the early Blackhawks of the dynasty era, like with Kane and Taves and whatever. Like when Patrick Kane was on a line, you knew, like, going into the hockey game, you're like, oh, well, Jonathan Taves is on another line, and Patrick Sharp is on another line, and Marian Hossa is on that line too. So it's like it's not just, hey, stop 88. You know, there are other weapons on those Blackhawks teams. Right now, it's just Connor that's really the driving force of some offense. And so even though you can maybe load up the line, like I've been banging my fist on the table to put Teravainen with Bedard and Bertuzzi, just load up that line. That's great, because I think it would put Connor in the best position to succeed and play with some of players that are like-minded or think the game the same way, and also bring a different element with Bertuzzi. Like the second, third, and fourth lines are still so thin that the opponent is like, stop the first line, you know? But if the Hawks had like a respectable second line and a third line or whatever, it makes it much harder for the opponents to defend. And so no concerns about Connor. And I also want to mention this, like I've mentioned this example a couple of times, but Nathan McKinnon, year 4 of the NHL for him, he had 53 points, only 16 goals in 82 games. And that was the year that Colorado finished with 48 points in the standings. It was like the worst season in NHL history to that point. And so a lot of these guys too, like think about Connor McDavid, like they went through a lot of trying times in their early years of their career. So it's nothing new, but it is frustrating because like you bring a teenager into this situation, you want to try to support him with a strong offensive cast or just a supporting cast. And you almost like, you're trying to find ways to like cut corners, like psychologically, you're like, man, how can we fast track this to make sure he's in a position to succeed? But at the same time, I've always said it, if you try to cut those corners, you'll do more harm than good in the long term.
Yeah. I do believe that, and again, nobody is ever really patient when you talk about fans and you look at it from our perspective. But I do hope that they're active in free agency, or if they look at their roster and their prospects and they see a log jam at a certain position and they're like, we've got a surplus here and there's only going to be so many spots for these players to progress to in the National Hockey League. maybe we consider dealing them for some help now, because, watching Bedard last night, it was bad. It reminded me of times when you and I would watch Kane together and we would go, he's feeling it tonight. You can just tell he's got it.
Yep.
And Bedard had it last night. Like, I think he had 7 shot attempts, 3 shots on goal. They only had the 1 power play. I liked him on the right flank, moving around. He was with better players, more skilled players. I can't even imagine where he's going to take his game. It's going to be next level. And you look at his most consistent partner last year, Phil Kurashev, can't even get in the lineup. He's been a healthy scratch basically 10 of the last 12 games. We're talking about trying to find balance scoring with lines. They can't even find him a consistent line mate. Now, Bertuzzi, since December 21st, oddly enough, it was against Calgary when they put him together. They're getting smoked in the third period, and they put him together and they connected on 2 backdoor goals, which we've seen now well over a handful of times between Bedard and Bertuzzi. They put them together, and they've been together ever since. So it is trying to find that third winger. We talked about, you mentioned it in the last podcast about McClellan's. Was it McClellan's philosophy? Yeah. Where, you find 2 that stay together and rotate and try to find the third. Don't keep juggling lines, all 3 players. To me, like, back to my earlier question, is it system or effort as far as these lopsided scores? Will you take the lopsided scores to see more from Bedard and make him feel a little bit better about himself? I think I will. I saw the movie script for the 3-1 games and the 2-1 games and the 4-2 games all too often for the first 35 games of the season. I'm about development for 98 and realizing that, he's the driving force behind this franchise going forward. And you can't, he can't come in the locker room and be excited about scoring his 100th career point in a 5-2 loss. But when he drives home at night, he can feel that he's doing the best he can. And, maybe that will continue to show promise for his game and for the future of the franchise. There are other players that, like, we got to get into Seth Jones. I feel like, honestly, I feel like he's been a punching bag for the last few years. But Charlie, he's been working harder with Kevin Dean. I remember last week we were in the locker room at Fifth Third, and Kevin Dean came by his stall and said, "Hey, let's meet. When you're done showering or whatever, just come to my office." And then a couple days later, I heard that was happening on a regular basis. And Seth's been on the ice for a ton of opposing teams' goals, and here he is working on it. And last night, Charlie, he probably had his worst game of the season.
I would go even farther. That's probably his worst game as a Blackhawk.
And that's saying something.
It is, yeah. And it was really difficult because that game last night, obviously the -4. By the way, I think that's 3 straight games now where he doesn't even have a shot on goal either. So it feels like it's filtering into his offensive confidence too, where he's not pulling the trigger on some shots that he was earlier in the year. And it was a backbreaker on that shorthanded goal against, because you have a 5-minute power play. You just capitalize a minute in with Connor Bedard's goal.
Make
so you're like,
4-2.
Okay. Yeah. So you're like, all right, we got some momentum here. And then for that to happen, the shorthanded goal, it was unfortunate, not to pile on, but like after the goal was scored, the shorthanded goal was scored, Seth Jones was so frustrated that he went to slap the puck out of the out of the net, and like he totally whiffed on the puck, and he had to do it a second time. I was like, geez, it's just like when it rains, it pours. Like we were watching it after, I think they threw out the second power play unit right after that. And then after the first unit got their rest again, and the first unit was getting ready to go back out, like Troy Murray had mentioned, we were talking about it in the post-game show. He had mentioned that like Seth got up, he like stood up and was getting ready to hop over the bench, and like Alex Vlasic went on the ice, and like Seth kind of turned around and like sat back down. So it was like he got skipped in the rotation of that power play. And I believe too, Seth didn't see the ice for the last 5 minutes of the first period too. So I think I think he saw the bench a couple times. And so when we're talking about accountability, like I saw that was like kind of a big topic of on social media last night. Like he was held accountable in a public way too, where he only logged 16 minutes of ice time. That was as fewest that he's ever had in a game with Chicago. I mean, that guy is literally like second or third in time on ice average in the entire NHL. And so here's where I will defend him to some degree. When the Blackhawks made the coaching change, Seth was out of the lineup with the foot injury. So everyone had a few weeks to kind of get rolling together. And he maybe returned sooner than he was ready to from the foot injury, maybe prioritizing the Winter Classic and wanting to be part of that. So that probably plays a role, but also, it's a new system. I don't want to play that card though too much, because it's not rocket science. Again, like it's a system that actually should be benefiting him by joining the rush more. But I think there probably is still some hesitancy of trying to figure out what his role is in the new system defensively. And, but some of these goals against that I watched with Seth, they don't have anything to do with system. It's just like your guy was backdoor and, he just forgot. I don't know. So it's hard. And I don't want to pile on, because I know the fan base does enough of that. And I think some of it is unfair just because of the contract that comes with it. And, it wasn't Davidson that gave it to him. It was like the previous regime was trying to go for it. And so I think some of it is not warranted, but in a case right now, I think it is. He just has not looked the same since returning from injury.
You talk about accountability. It starts at every level with the Blackhawks, including the AHL. And we found out this week that Artyom Levshunov and Paul Ludwinski were both scratched from a Rockford Ice Hogs game. And it was because they were late for a team meeting. And so Mark Eaton and Mark Bernard, they sent the message that, that's unacceptable. And I thought that this is to me, if you can sit the number 2 overall pick and you send a message to everybody in your organization.
Yeah, no one's immune from if you miss a team meeting or if you're late to a team meeting or whatever. And they put their teammates in a bad spot because Rockford played one guy down the entire game. They played 17 skaters with those scratches, and 2 of those players that played in the game, 2 of the forwards, ended up getting hurt midway through the game. So they played the half of the game with only 9 forwards. And so I think that is also kind of like an eye-opener, like, hey, late to a team meeting, you put your teammates in a tough spot too. Now they had to play one guy down. And so good learning lesson. I like that the organization did that. It was a little funny seeing some of the rumors flying around. Like I was like, I saw one rumor that was like, a deal with Vancouver for Pettersson is imminent. And I was like, Jesus, what is happening? So no, nice to see the organization kind of put their foot down. And I think it's a learning lesson too, for those young guys that, no one's kind of immune to that.
You mentioned Elias Pettersson. There, we're approaching the March 7th trade deadline. Do you think internally they're considering any big time type of move?
I think it could be just being discussed, like, okay, like what's out there, and if we were to be in on this, what would we have to give up, but also what would the other team be looking for? So if you're Vancouver and you want Elias Pettersson, Hawks have a loaded pipeline, but I don't think Vancouver is looking for prospects.
No.
Like I think they're looking for.
They're going to want a center in return.
Yeah. Like you saw the what was the it was the JT Miller for Mika Zibanejad. Like that was on the table, I guess, and one of the two teams vetoed. I think it was the Canucks. And so it's like I think Vancouver is looking to do that stuff, but your overall point I think is accurate as far as like, okay, what's out there? Like, you know, is a guy like Dylan Cousins available? Okay, if you were to go Dylan Cousins, if you want a guy like that, what would he take? You're like, what would you give up? What would Buffalo want? You know, if Buffalo's like, we want to retool this thing, we want NHL players, Hawks are probably not going to be the dancing partner. But if there's a team out there that's like looking to full scale rebuild or whatever, and they have a guy, you know, whatever, they have a guy that's like prominently on the market, and you're like, hey, we need picks and prospects, Chicago, you know, call the phone, you know, pick up the phone, because I think that's the route. So, yeah, so we'll see how it kind of transpires over the next month or so as the deadline heats up.
So if you're looking for maybe a distraction, or we talked about how can we see this team lighten the mood and have some fun? Well, maybe the mentor / dad's trip that will commence tomorrow, Wednesday, and it'll be kind of an away and home version. It'll be in Nashville on Wednesday and Thursday. They'll come back to Chicago on Thursday night, and it will continue Saturday's game at the United Center. So maybe the dads in the building will ratchet up the focus, and they will not want to feel embarrassed, and they're going to want to put on a good show for their dads or their mentor, and maybe that we'll see some progress in the win column.
Well, so Thursday's game is in Nashville, and then Saturday's game is against Vegas. And I was like, man, thank God that Saturday game is not in Vegas, because Broadway in Vegas, I don't know if the dads would have survived that trip. So yeah, no, it's nice. It's nice that it's coming at a time where it's like desperately needed, right? And so hopefully this is kind of an opportunity for some of those players to get their heads in the right place and play a fun hockey game on Thursday. Hopefully pick up a victory, and then finish off the weekend strong.
All right. You got anything else as we exit stage left?
I don't have anything else, Pat. I just want some more wins to talk about.
Yeah, we may have to start doing some prospect podcasts or mailbags or something, because yeah, these the tone of these ones lately has been really frustrating and hard. But that is going to do it for this edition of the Blackhawks Breakaway podcast for CHSN, brought to you by Toyota. For Charlie Roumeliotis, I'm Pat Boyle. Thank you for watching and listening, and we'll catch you next time.